The daily. We'll begin with a quote by Ellen White. I know that the sanctuary question stands in righteousness and truth, just as we have held it for so many years. It is the enemy that leads minds off on sidetracks. He is pleased when those who know the truth become engrossed in collecting scriptures to pile around erroneous theories which have no foundation in truth. The scriptures thus are misapplied. They were not given to substantiate error, but to strengthen truth. This presentation is not a detailed explanation of how the pioneers, using Sola Scriptura and history to come to the understanding they held on the daily of Daniel. It is an overview of what they believed, with a few examples of Sola Scriptura and history on the key words in the text. The daily is meant for you to spend time figuring out with God. This is a 1 hour overview of what the pioneers believed. The importance of the verses in Daniel regarding the daily is for our day in 2026, and that they were designed by our loving Heavenly Father to awaken His people to the truth that the final movements will be rapid and to wow modern mankind with the intricate prophecies in Daniel, and that only Adventism, true Adventism, fully and rightfully understand. The Catholics and the Protestants have the understanding of the daily in Daniel 11 completely wrong. None of the prophecies fit together in the new Adventist modernist view. In fact, they ignore Daniel 12 and the 1290 and the 1335 prophecy altogether, or they will put them way off in the future, whereas the old pioneer view has them perfectly fitting together in their proper place and time. Adventism was raised up to identify and clarify to the whole world these final movements of prophecy. The Sunday law issue, the time of trouble, the little time of trouble, all these things are about to begin. The pioneer view is based on a line upon line approach, using only the Bible to understand it, and the aid of a concordance to help you find all the places in the King James Bible that key words in the passages are found. The spirit of prophecy, through God's messenger Ellen White, will then aid the student of the Bible with a second witness to the scriptures that they are accurate, as well as history, where both perfectly match the scriptures with the old pioneer view. The modernist view is based on misapplied history and on modern Jesuit Bible translations and a great misuse of Hebrew and Greek. The modernist view completely ignores Spirit of Prophecy's strong and clear statement from Ellen White and Ellen in early writings that the pioneer view is correct. It also will not accept a line upon line approach. It completely rejects the King James Bible and Sola Scriptura. In the 1800s, William Miller understood the daily without the writings of Ellen White, called the Spirit of Prophecy, because it did not exist when he learned of the 2300-day prophecy in the daily. He understood it just by using the Bible and a concordance to look up where the scriptures were. He did not use lexicons, commentaries, theologians, Greek and Hebrew to understand the daily and the 2300-day prophecy. He just used the Bible, line upon line approach. But he really was a new view of the daily, since the entire world in his day had the wrong understanding of the scriptures applying the daily to Antiochus Epiphanes. The first and second generation pioneers later had to resort to using Hebrew and Greek in order to deal with the General Conference, who was taught Greek and Hebrew in the Adventist universities against the Council of Ellen White. And those students became the leaders of the General Conference, teaching by the 1900s the false view of the daily and the later false view of the King of the North in Daniel 11. And this false view of the daily, as well as the Trinity, was brought into Adventism by Louis Conradi by 1900. The subject of the daily and the Daniel is one of the most misunderstood prophetic symbols in the study of prophecy and is a long time running controversy in Adventism since the early 1900s. It has pretty much subsided now in our day. In fact, nobody is going to even talk about it because the false view of the daily is so thoroughly accepted by Adventism from the universities that teach it that there's not much discussion about it any longer. Most Adventists have no idea there even is another view of the daily. They have not heard about the controversy, and the conference wants to keep it that way. We're going to give an overview looking at one, the key concepts and counterfeits, who discovered the pioneer view of the daily and how, the old pioneers so very few know of versus the universal new modernist view, the Ellen White clear statement on the daily, and what happens when you accept the modernist view of the daily as taught throughout Conference Adventism. Now, the true versus the counterfeit view. Many of the daily concepts have a counterfeit. Example, in Daniel, there is both a pagan sanctuary and a godly sanctuary, but both use the same English word sanctuary, but different Hebrew words. Context clearly shows which one, but God used two different words in the Hebrew to make the difference clear. The Hebrew is not necessary to understand the daily, but it is an interesting study and will lead you to the exact same conclusion, though I will tell you it's a lot of work. But it's going to lead you to the same conclusion that the line upon line approach does. Unfortunately, the wily wise Adventist leaders starting in the early 1900s totally rejected the King James and the inspiration of SOP and the clear Bible teaching on Daniel regarding the daily and the King of the North. Those wily wise Adventist leaders and the General Conference would only listen to arguments using Hebrew and Greek. Now, I've been endeavoring to understand how the second generation Adventists presented the daily from the Hebrew, but I want to emphasize, as interesting as it is to me, it is not necessary. Light to our path is the Bible, Sola Scriptura, a true history. But where find it? The victors, General Conference, have rewritten the history books. So the true history that these pioneers were using, we're not finding the same history that they found. We're finding a rewritten history. So that's something you need to know when you study prophecy, is which history are you going to use? Making Spirit of Prophecy now incredibly helpful to learn the true history that guided the early pioneers. What is this Spirit of Prophecy? Who is the Spirit? Well, it's the presence of Jehovah and Jesus, teaching and guiding us in all truth. And how do they do that? Through the prophets of the Bible and the messenger of the Lord, Ellen White. Her visions and writings are inspired, as we have shown in part 2 of the 1919 Bible Conference. It was Ellen White's writings and the book by Uriah Smith and the writings of a few other pioneers that kept the aging early pioneers and then the next generation Adventist in the truth on the daily and the prophecies of Daniel. We must remember Satan started bringing in beautiful, attractive, sophisticated arguments against the truth. The 1897 book by Uriah Smith is perfectly titled Daniel and Revelation, the Response of History to the Voice of Prophecy. For the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Revelation 19:10. Daniel is the prophecy, and Revelation is the revealing of the prophecy, and those two books go together. When or does the scripture passage mean? See, the pioneer daily is paganism, pagan Rome, versus modernist daily is Christ's ministry in heaven. God's sanctuary versus pagan sanctuary. God's host versus pagan host. What and when are the prophecies given in Daniel? Have they taken place or are they in the future? Different prophecies and start dates. As you've been studying Daniel, you come across the 2300 day prophecy, the 70 weeks, the 1260, the 1290, the 1335, and the 508 start date, all in the book of Daniel. How does all 5 places of the daily fit with Daniel chapter 7 and 8, the little horn, Daniel chapter 11 with the king of the north, and Revelation chapter 13 and the sea beast? What does takeaway mean in the verses, including a new verse we're going to look at outside of the Daniel, 2 Thessalonians 2, 7 and 8? What does cast down mean? How was the place of his sanctuary cast down? What about the word that is not in the original Bible manuscripts, but was supplied by man and completely changes the meaning of the daily? What is the abomination of desolation, the transgression of desolation? And what is that connecting word and in the sentence structure with the daily, therefore? Why is it there? What does it mean for the dragon to give away his seat, power, authority? How did he do that? Well, let us dig in. Foundational understanding, we must know that the little horn of Daniel is 2 phases of one entity, which is Rome. First is a pagan phase, and in that pagan phase, it's tyranny, it's civil. But then it becomes a papal phase, and that's different. It's persecution, it's religious, it's a nation and a religion. It is a combination of church and state. It always gets someone else to do its dirty work. It always has someone else as its arms, its military. Other nations, other powers do its bidding. The little horn of Daniel is the sea beast of Revelation. The little horn gets its power from the dragon, which is Satan. All this is foundational before we dig in. Now, according to Daniel in Revelation, Uriah Smith's book, chapter 8, it says, the word daily appears in the Hebrew concordance 122 times and is in the great majority rendered continual or continually. The idea of sacrifice does not attach to the word at all, nor is there any word in the text which signifies sacrifice. That is wholly a supplied word. All 5 daily verses regarding the controversy are in the book of Daniel and are only found there. These are the 5 verses: Daniel 8:11, Daniel 8:12, Daniel 8:13, Daniel 11:31, Daniel 12:11. The daily means the same in each of the 5 verses, so the meaning is consistent. In order for the meaning of the daily to be accurate, It must work or fit the verse in each of the 5 places. And it's like the 5 by 5 Bible puzzle. You guys remember the Rubik's Cube? It was actually for Americans, only 3 wide. But in China, they made them 5 by 5. And I think this more accurately fits because we're looking at 5 verses that form this puzzle. And I think God put it in the book of Daniel because he wants us to study the Bible with him. And I don't think you're really going to understand the daily unless you invite him to show you the meaning of the daily. Now, the first 3 daily verses, Daniel 8:11 through 13, are these. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down, and a host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? This is the 4th daily verse. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. Daniel 11:31. And then the 5th daily verse. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Daniel 12:11. Let us now look at this testimony from William Miller, who discovered the truth on the daily. We will now see exactly how he came to understand what the daily in the book of Daniel represented using Sola Scriptura. Because as we read those 5 verses, are they not confusing to you? How did he figure it out using just the Bible? William Miller explains the simple line upon line approach that led him to the correct understanding on the daily as this, quote, I read on and could find no other case in which it, the daily, was found in Daniel. I then, by the aid of a concordance, took those words which stood in connection with it, take away, he shall take away the daily, from the time that the daily shall be taken away. I read on and thought I would find no light on the text, and finally I came to 2 Thessalonians 2:7 through 8. For the mystery of iniquity does already work. Only he who now letteth will let, until he be taken out of the way. Then shall that wicked be revealed. And when I had come to that text, oh, how clear and glorious the truth appeared. There it is. That is the daily. Well, now, what does Paul mean by he who now letteth or hindereth? By the man of sin and the wicked. Popery is meant. Well, what is it that hinders popery from being revealed? Why, it is paganism. Well, then, the daily must mean paganism. Review and Herald, January 1858. So when we turn to 2 Thessalonians 2, and I took the liberty of putting all 14 verses there from the chapter, you can now look at that context that those verses we just read were in. William Miller came to understand that the daily was symbolizing paganism, and if we look at Daniel 8, We see the daily in verses 11, 12, 13, Daniel 11:31, and Daniel 12:11. Notice the taken away in 3 verses of the 5 that the daily is used. So, taken away is something to pay attention to help us accurately identify who and what is the daily. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Daniel 12:11. In Daniel 12:11, William Miller sees that the daily is taken away. And in Daniel 11:31, and shall take away the daily, another place where the daily is taken away. And in Daniel 8, yea, he magnified himself even to the host of heaven, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away. So William Miller is seeing this daily taken away, but he can't understand what it is. Through the aid of a concordance, he realizes that in Thessalonians, Paul is speaking to them in terms that the man of sin at that time was yet in the future. The man of sin was not going to ascend to the throne of the earth until the power that then existed and was restraining the man of sin from rising to the throne of the world was removed. The power that then existed in Paul's day and was restraining popery from taking control of the world at that time was the pagan Roman Empire, paganism. It was the controlling influence of the world at that time. And that history of the relationship between paganism and papalism is one of the most important discussed in Bible prophecy. This is part of what Bible prophecy is built around. This relationship between pagan Rome and papal Rome. Now we're going to start breaking it down again. Daniel 8:11 through 13. Let us dig in. Daniel 8:11, verses 11, Daniel 8:11 through 13. Notice first use of daily begins with yea, giving emphasis to it. God is wanting you to pay attention here. Yea, he, pagan Rome, magnified himself even to Jesus, the Prince of the host, and by which the translators in their marginal notes added from him. So it would read, yea, he, pagan Rome, magnified himself even to Jesus, and from him, pagan Rome, paganism was removed. Now, I got to stop here and just kind of interject something. For those of you who dig into this and start studying, you're going to find some Adventists today who study the Hebrew and Greek as they try to understand how the second generation Adventist went to bat for the pioneer view using Hebrew and Greek. And they would look at this Hebrew taken away and they would go, oh, that's the Hebrew word room there instead of sir. And that means lifted up. But it doesn't matter whether you want to say that means lifted up or taken away as in removed. They're both removed. They're both removed out of their place. So now that I've said that, I hope it's not confusing. I'm just kind of trying to give you a little bit of insight. If you were to study this out and you were to try to study Hebrew and Greek on it and you were to listen to other people's take, you're going to come across that and it's confusing. But when you study this out, like I've done here and place it, if you take some time and study this, you're going to see it doesn't matter. So I'm going to start again, and now we're going to read through it. Yea, pagan Rome magnified himself even to Jesus. And from pagan Rome, paganism was taken away, removed. And the place located in Rome of the pagan sanctuary, the Pantheon, was moved from Rome to Constantinople by Constantine. Now, hang in there because I'm going to go over each and every point in just a few minutes. I'm trying to just read through and introduce you. This is the pioneer view. This is what they came to by studying line upon line and true history that they had available to them that we don't today easily. This is what they understood. The second verse, 12. And a host, the barbarians that warred against pagan Rome and became converts to Catholicism and became the host of papal Rome, was given to papal Rome. So when you study history, you're going to go, wait a minute, the barbarians were warring against pagan Rome. That's right. But papal Rome used them to take out pagan Rome. So you got to know history. So let's start again, verse 12. And the barbarians became the host given to papal Rome against paganism, specifically Heruli, Vandals, and Ostrogoths, by reason of transgression. This means the working of the mystery of iniquity. We'll explain that in a minute. And it cast down, how did it do that? By loading down with traditions, turning into mummery and superstition, and obscuring. So that's how it cast down. It did so by introducing its religious traditions, turning the truth into mummery, superstition, and then obscuring it. The truth was known by the pioneers to be the law of God to the ground. It couldn't have been trampled on anymore. And it practiced. It practiced its deceptions, its schemes, its cunning to carry out its own end, much like doctors practice today. And it prospered by making war with the saints and prevailed. So let's read it again. And the barbarians were given papal Rome against paganism by the working of the mystery of iniquity, and it cast down by loading the truth with traditions and turning it into mummery, superstitions, and obscuring it. It cast down the law of God to the ground, and it practiced its deceptions and cunning, and it made war with the saints and prevailed. Now let us turn to the next verse. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint, I'm going to stop here. You're going to find when you start studying this out, there's some conjecture. I haven't been able to locate the Pioneer or Ellen White view on this, so I don't know if this is truth or not. But that certain saint, some have said, and it makes sense. I just don't know the proof. That certain saint, some have said, was Jesus. Because this daily understanding in the 2300 days is so important to understand so we're not deceived at the end of time. That Jesus himself is speaking to the other saint and answering the question of how long shall the vision concerning the daily be. So let me start again. I don't know if that's true, so we're just going to introduce that, but now I'm going to dig in and let's explain a little bit more from the pioneer view on this verse. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spoke, How long shall be the vision, the entire vision? because there are two Hebrew words in Daniel for vision, a mare vision and a Shazon vision. One is an entire vision, and the other is a part of the entire vision. So when we see the word vision, it's helpful to know which one we're talking about. Now, you don't need Hebrew and Greek. You could just simply look at context and figure out, oh, okay, I think this is the entire vision here. And it is. The pioneers understood that to be the entire vision. Concerning paganism, transgression of desolation is papal Rome, to give both God's sanctuary and God's people to be persecuted. So I'm going to read it again, and we're going to really dig into the trodden underfoot and the place of his sanctuary, transgression of desolation, all of that in just a few minutes. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the entire vision concerning paganism and papal Rome, to give both God's sanctuary and God's people to be persecuted? Wow, that's crystal clear. Let's read it again. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto the certain saint which spake, how long shall be this entire vision concerning paganism and papal Rome, to give both God's sanctuary and God's people to be persecuted? Reason of transgression. The papacy is the most cunningly contrived, false ecclesiastical system ever devised, and it may be called a system of iniquity because it has committed its abominations and practiced its orgies of superstition in the garb and under the pretense of pure and undefiled religion. Now we're going to look at trodden underfoot. This is a beautiful passage. We're studying the daily, and you just get sick when you read about the persecution and how evil the papacy is. But listen to what Uriah Smith says about trodden underfoot. It's kind of beautiful. The Lord's eye is upon his people. The furnace will be heated no hotter than necessary to consume the dross. It is through much tribulation we are to enter the kingdom. And the word tribulation is from tribulum, a threshing sledge. Blow after blow must be laid upon us till all the wheat is beaten free from the chaff, and we are made fit for the heavenly garner. But not a kernel of wheat shall be lost. Says the Lord to his people, ye are the light of the world, the salt of the earth. In his eyes there is nothing else on earth of consequence or importance. Hence the peculiar question here asked, how long the vision respecting the daily and transgression of desolation? Concerning what? The glory of his earthly kingdoms, the skill of renowned warriors, the fame of mighty conquerors, the greatness of human empire? No, but concerning the sanctuary and the host, the people and worship of the Most High. How long shall they be trodden underfoot? Here is where all heaven's interest and sympathy are enlisted. He who touches the people of God touches not mere mortals, weak and helpless, but omnipotence. He who opens an account which must be settled at the bar of heaven. And soon all these accounts will be adjusted. The iron heel of oppression will itself be crushed, and a people will be brought out of the furnace, prepared to shine as the stars forever and ever. To be one who is an object of interest to heavenly beings, one whom the providence of God is engaged to preserve while here and crown with immortality hereafter. What an exalted position! How much higher than that of any king, president, or potentate of earth. Reader, are you one of the number? How I love that. So encouraging. But let us pick up in the study of the daily in the counterfeits. Now we're going to look these three counterfeits: a sanctuary, a host, and a seat. Notice the counterfeits in these three verses. Sanctuary, we have two kinds of sanctuaries: a pagan sanctuary of worship, sacrifice, and idolatry called the pantheon, or a godly sanctuary, holiness and pure worship. And then we see in these passages two kinds of hosts: those belonging to pagan or papal Rome, and those belonging to God, which is his people. And his people have a prince, Jesus, the prince of the host. Remember also that Satan is called prince of the power of the air. He also is a prince. Ephesians 2:2. And then another counterfeit, seat. Pagan seat given by Satan, the city of Rome, whereas Jesus also has a seat, a judgment seat, Corinthians 5:10. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive the things done in his body according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad. Place of his sanctuary. This is from the Roman Pantheon. The title on the picture said, "The Roman Pantheon had a god for all seasons, and then some." Place of a sanctuary. Another pioneer was quoted in an article in the Review and Herald, January 1858, Apollos Hale, known as a historian, and he talks about this pagan sanctuary. What can be meant by the sanctuary of paganism? Paganism and every kind have their sanctuaries as well as truth. There are temples and asylums consecrated to their service. Some particular and renowned temple of paganism may then be supposed to be here spoken of in verse 11. Which of the numerous distinguished temples may it be? One of the most magnificent specimens of classic architecture is called the Pantheon. Its name signifies temple or asylum of the gods. The place of its location is Rome. The idols of the nations conquered by the Romans were sacredly deposited in some niche or department of this temple, and in many cases became objects of worship by the Romans themselves. Could we find a temple of paganism that more strikingly is his sanctuary? Review and Herald, January 1858. No, we can't, it continues. The Pantheon is the sanctuary associated with pagan Rome, and it most clearly symbolizes paganism. When Rome would conquer another nation, if they worshiped any false deities Rome already wasn't worshiping, they would gather up those idols and relics and bring them back to this pantheon and make a place for those deities to reside. Rome brought into its sanctuary every pagan god that it could find. So when we look here at verse 11 with a little bit of insight, we can see that the pioneers taught, yea, pagan Rome magnified itself to Christ when they crucified him. And by him, or if you look at the Hebrew, it is better translated from him, and from him paganism was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Rome, the city of Rome, the place where his sanctuary of renown is situated, was cast down when Constantine moved the capital to Constantinople. Place is cast down. Daniel is saying, okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about pagan Rome. 2 verses earlier, I told you about the areas of conquest it took to conquer the world. But in this verse, I am going to tell you that this is the power that is going to crucify Christ. But this is also the power that is going to take away paganism. Isn't that strange? Think about it. Continuing. And the place of his sanctuary shall be cast down. And the word sanctuary used here in the Bible can mean either pagan sanctuary or God's sanctuary. You have to identify what it's speaking of by context. And by the context here, this sanctuary clearly is the pagan sanctuary of Rome. The place where it was in the city of Rome. And part of the prophetic historic story of pagan Rome is that it came to its end. Rome's time to rule the world came to an end at this moment, where the place of his sanctuary was cast down. Dragon gives his seat. The connection with revelation. You see, remember, the reformers had revelation, but they didn't have Daniel. And when they got Daniel, then they knew who the Antichrist was. So we know that there's this very close relationship between the books of Daniel and Revelation. In Revelation 13:2, we see the dragon gives his seat, his power, and authority to the beast. And we know that the little horn starts as pagan Rome, but becomes papal Rome, the sea beast. When Sister White comments in Revelation 13, she says, the dragon there, although primarily representing Satan in a secondary sense, represents pagan Rome. It gives its power, authority, and seat to the papacy, to the beast being discussed in those first verses of Revelation 13. The seat that pagan Rome gave to the papacy here is the city of Rome, where the papacy would rule from. And this transition of pagan Roman Empire, turning over the keys of the kingdom, so to speak, to the papal Roman Empire, is woven throughout the prophecy of Daniel and Revelation. So, why was this seat moved from Rome to Constantinople? The internet answer to the question, which is actually very good. So here we go. You have to look at an actual map of Constantinople. We're going to look at it in just a sec. It's one of the most perfectly formed cities ever. I'm going to tell you, when I started studying Constantinople, I marveled at this city. It is a marvel. Comparing it to ugly, old, dirty Rome, I mean, you just go, wow, look how striking Constantinople is. You're going to see in a minute. First, it's easily defensible. It's on a peninsula, meaning it's protected by water on all three sides, with only one side needing a wall against land invasion. So it was very, very hard to invade. Second, it sits right on the Bosphorus Straits, meaning it's been in the center of tons of rich trade for centuries. Ships coming to and from the east to Europe and vice versa frequently cross through Constantinople. And it was a very wealthy city. Third, the eastern half of the Roman Empire, and this is something I was never taught. This is something that's been new history to me because they like to keep people stupid in the school system in America. But you know that the Roman Empire was split in two, and we've heard about it, but wow, listen to the detail. The eastern half of the Roman Empire was always richer and more stable than the western half. Physically, the Eastern Roman Empire had a much shorter frontier to defend when the Western Roman Empire than the Western Roman Empire. There were also more cities in the east than in the west, meaning more tax revenue. So it made sense that Constantine would want to move the center of government over to Constantinople. Fourth, you keep saying the Roman Empire collapsed with the fall of Rome. Now, I heard that. I've heard that my whole life. But listen to this. To the people of the Byzantine Empire in the East, it never collapsed because in their minds, they were the Roman Empire. And we today call them Byzantines. But the Byzantines always refer to their empire as Imperium Romanum. And the move was, in retrospect, quite successful because the eastern half of the Roman Empire lasted 1,000 years longer than the western half. And that was with Christianity to boot. So let's look at this divide first here. This is how far Constantine had to move the capital over to make Constantinople. And so you see, that's quite the distance, splitting the empire in half. Here's Constantinople, like an aerial view illustrated, and we can see it projects out. And this picture shows it illustrated. Wow, what a magnificent city. Take a look at the central feature of it. It makes the Roman Colosseum look quite small, doesn't it? Look at the Hippodrome. They had chariot races, they did executions. Really was an awful place. But when you look at this city, you just marvel at it. And I got to tell you, the more I studied it, I marveled at the wealth of this city and how they planned this city. It was beautifully planned. The fourth daily verse, Daniel 11:31. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. You must know that Ellen White says Daniel 11:31 through Daniel 11:36 will be repeated again at the end of time. So we need to understand this verse. Notice the change here with the daily. And arms, military strength to remove the three Aryan nations of Heruli, Vandals, and Ostrogoths, shall stand on his part, which is Papal Rome's part, and they, the seven kingdoms of the 10 kingdoms, shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, the city of Rome, and shall take away the pagan Rome, and they, the seven kingdoms, shall establish Papal Rome. Before I read that again and make it more clear, I'm going to read this little addition. Arms place the papacy on the throne of the earth. The papacy never does her own dirty work, but instead uses other powers and nations to overthrow anyone in its way. The papacy, the most exalted form of idolatry in history, with its pagan idolatry clothed with a profession of Christianity, rises to rule the world through church and state, which is the image of the beast in Revelation. In this verse, Daniel no longer calls this power, which has become the papal little horn phase, he no longer calls it the transgression of desolation. Remember the mystery of iniquity, but instead calls it the abomination of desolation and includes idle Sabbath of Sunday worship. Whoa, that's a lot to think on. But let us look at this verse. And military strength to remove those three Aryan nations who would not accept the Trinity shall stand for Papal Rome. And the seven kingdoms of the 10 that are left shall pollute the city of Rome and take away pagan Rome, so that those seven kingdoms shall establish Papal Rome. I'm going to read it again. It really does make sense when you understand what these, these terms mean. Military strength shall be given to the papal Rome, and these 7 kingdoms that are left out of the 10 shall pollute the city of Rome and take away paganism, and these 7 kingdoms shall establish papal Rome. Now let us turn to the 5th. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. And from the 508 time that paganism shall be removed and papal Rome set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So let me read that again. And from 508 AD, paganism shall be removed and papal Rome established. There shall be 1,290 days. We'll say it one more time. And from 508 AD, paganism shall be removed and papal Rome established. And that shall be 1,290 days from the time of 508. So watch closely. The history of how the papacy came to control the world the first time is the pattern of how the papacy is going to control the world the second time. To fully understand that, there's a beautiful book called Facts of Our Faith by Christian Edwardson. I think it's Edwards or Edwardson, but it's Facts of Our Faith. And in that book, he gives the details of exactly how those 7 kingdoms took out paganism. So let us watch closely. Remember how that verse identified 508 AD, and then we see in Daniel 12 the 1290 and 1335 prophecy that the new view just ignores and puts it way far now into the future, but it actually fits so perfectly together. Look at this, truth triumphant. So Daniel 12:11, and from the time that the daily shall be taken away and the abomination maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. And then 12:12, blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,305 and 30 days. From the time when paganism has reached the point where it was no longer giving resistance to Catholicism, had come into agreement with Catholicism, and working to place Catholicism on the throne of the world, that point is marked in history as 508. And from 508 shall be 1,290 days. AD 508 plus 1,290 days, a day for is a year in Bible prophecy, brings us where? To 1798. What's so special about that day? 1798 marks the end of papal rule. It was the beginning of the end of paganism, 508, but it was not until 30 years later that papal Rome was established on the throne upon the removal of the last of the 3 horns in 538. So there was a 30-year time that it took for paganism to fully come in line and be taken away by papalism. And so it wasn't an overnight thing. So when people look at 508 and they want to say, well, it didn't happen, in that number, they can't quite justify it, it's because they don't understand it took 30 years. When you read the book's Facts of Our Faith, it fills it explains it so perfectly. So AD 508 plus 1290 brings us to 1798. 1798 marks the end of papal rule. That was when Napoleon marched into Italy and his general Berthier captured the Pope, took away his nation status, and marched him all the way to a castle and locked him up, and he died soon after. And from 1798 all the way to 19, I think 29, the papacy ruled as a religion, but not as a nation. So that is how 1798 marks the end of papal rule. Then the beginning of the end of paganism was 508. But it was 30 years it took for the time when paganism reached the point where it was no longer giving resistance, that it had come into agreement, and that it worked to place papacy on the throne of the world. That is a significant mark in history, 508. And I want to tell you that the Catholics and the Protestants and the Adventists take that 508 and throw it in the trash can. And Washburn has an amazing article I want to soon do a reading on and post it on our website, where he calls it the 5 year slippery slope of the new view. And what they want to do with 508 is take 5 years from it or add 5 years, but they don't want to attribute it to paganism. So 508, and we go into that second prophecy. There were two, 1290. That makes sense. Look at that. 508 plus 1290 brings us to 1798, which marks the end of papal rule. The deadly wound here that Revelation talks about. Remember that deadly wound? It almost appears as if he's going to die, but he doesn't. And it's interesting, Uriah Smith, he made a great mistake in Daniel and Revelation, because unfortunately he stated that the papacy will never regain its nation status. But he wasn't inspired, and he couldn't see that God was going to resurrect the papacy and give it back its nation status to fully become the sea beast. The beginning of the end of paganism was 508, but let us look at the second prophecy that's built on 508. AD 508 plus 1335 brings you where? 1843. So let us take a look at some reading to help us understand this better, starting with 1798, time of the end begins. So when you study the pioneer view, you're going to see we assume time of the end to be now, right? We're thinking it's our time. But it was actually a very specific reference in history to 1798. Therefore, it is in 1798, at the completion of the 1260 years. There's a second time prophecy. 1260 ends in 1798 also. That the time of the end begins. The angel is telling Daniel that the 2300-day judgment and the abomination of desolation, papacy, will remain a sealed book and not be understood until sometime after 1798. This intense investigation of Daniel's sealed prophecies after 1798 is foreshadowed in the phrase, "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, knowledge shall be increased." The phrase "run to and fro" describes the process used to roll out the sacred scripture to study it. Knowledge regarding Daniel's sealed prophecies would increase at the time of the end, because people would turn to his book and study it. The 1335, God's last warning message. The 1335 days mark a crucial date. The next time prophecy of Daniel 12:12 must also be seen in the same context. Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1335 days, but go thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of the days. Also dating this prophecy from the beginning of the 1290 days, 508, we come to 1843. So why is 1843 so important to mention in prophecy? First, because it dates when God's last warning message will begin. But more importantly, there is a very vital relationship between the preaching of the three angels' message and the abomination of desolation that the papacy set up in the church. The 1260 and 1290 day prophecies concern themselves with the fact that God's truth will be overcome by the papacy for a time. But the 1335 and the 2300 days answer the question of when the abomination of desolation will begin to be reversed. In 1843, we see the beginning of the restoration of the sanctuary truth, along with other truths obliterated by the dark reign of the papacy. Simply stated, in chapter 12, the prophet Daniel expresses his concern about the attack on truth he saw in the vision of chapter 11, 31 through 39. He wants to know when it will be reversed, and he persists in asking God for insight. God's response is that the people who live at the end of the 1335 days will see this blessed event. At this time of Earth's history, Daniel's sealed prophecy will stand and fulfill its appointed purpose. 1335 is significant because God restores the truth trampled by the papacy through the three angels' messages of Revelation 14. All the truth lost during the 1260-year papal supremacy known as the Dark Ages is restored. Hallelujah. We're almost closing. Hard to find an accurate chart. Modernists leave off the 508. So just go into Google and type in the 2300 day prophecy time chart, and boom, you're going to see hundreds of them. By the modernists, they're going to leave off 508. It is almost impossible now to find a chart with the 508. But this really helps you to study the daily. So we know that prophetic day equals a literal year. We know that for Numbers 14:34 and Ezekiel 4:5 through 6. Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. This is the key verse. This is what Adventism was built on, Daniel 8:13 through 17. We have these 2,300 prophetic days, which I don't think any other church in the world can explain it. Adventism perfectly explains it. 2,300-day prophecy, we look at the start date of 457, a decree to go forth and rebuild Jerusalem. We've covered that in other presentations. It's crystal clear in Scripture. That is when the 2,300-day prophecy begins. And then we can just simply go forward, follow the line all the way over, and you get 1335 days. Where does it end? You've got, it begins in 508. 1335 ends in AD 43. The 1290 of Daniel ends in 1798. It really fits together, just like that Rubik's Cube. It all fits together. We have our 2300, our 1335, our 1290. We have the 70 weeks or the 490 year prophecy. All these prophecies, 2,300 days, 1,260 days or years of papal rule, Dark Ages, all of it fits perfectly together, just like the Rubik's Cube. When you do it right, all comes together. And this is what the pioneers understood. We're going to really briefly go over Spirit of Prophecy in support of Sola Scriptura, what God revealed to Ellen White on the daily, so we would not be deceived by the cunning of the GC Adventist leaders. This is her opening statement. We're not going to read it. We're just going to look at this. Then I saw in relation to the daily that the word sacrifice was supplied by man's wisdom, does not belong in the text, and that the Lord gave the correct view of it to those who gave the judgment hour cry. When union existed before 1844, nearly all were united on the correct view of the daily. But in the confusion since 1844, other views have been embraced. and darkness and confusion have followed. And time has not been a test since 1844, and it will never again be a test. That should bring the discussion about the daily to a complete conclusion. And we could go on to discuss the 2300-day prophecy and the rest of Daniel and King of the North. But unfortunately, we have to spend all this time overcoming wrong ideas and the cunning position of the General Conference and the Catholic Protestant churches about the daily. But you must remember, from the 1919 Bible Conference, the daily was hotly debated due to all the false concepts skillfully woven in that has now continued for the rest of these brave pioneers' lives all the way to ours. But the General Conference view on the daily, it has changed. Over all these years, over 100 years, it's been evolving. Now, it should be case closed. Pioneers, Ellen White, all knew it was not a big deal. They spent so little time on it because it was so clear. Clear from Sola Scriptura, it's paganism. But now it has become a big deal and is so confusing because of the attractive false beliefs of who would not rather talk of Jesus than Satan, that false belief it's Jesus ministry in heaven. Oh man, doesn't that sound wonderful? But it's not the truth. And then who brought in the false beliefs? Man, these leaders were so charismatic. You marveled at them. Now, I just want to bring out, I'm going to briefly show up some charts. Ministries that show these charts, they generally believe there's another prophecy that Ellen White and the pioneers rejected, and that's called the 2520 time prophecy. I just have to make it very clear that I am not emphasizing nor teaching a 2520 time prophecy. Now, we're going to look real briefly at two charts, and then we're going to conclude. You're going to see in the first chart, the 1335 and the 1290 days of Daniel are smack dab in the middle. And next to that, you're going to see the year 508, identified by the pioneers as the time when the daily paganism began its work of removing the three horns that were standing in the way of papal Rome rising to the throne. So they had to be taken out. They would not become Trinitarian, but they were pagan. This is the chart the pioneers used. Okay, 1843. Here's our chart, 1335, 1290, right smack dab in the middle. You see it so clearly. Yes, there is a 2520 and ending in 1843, but the pioneers soon discarded teaching that belief and they focused on the clear pagan Rome, which is shown very clearly in the center of this chart, and they identified the daily as paganism. Then we have a new chart, 1850, 1 year after William Miller died. And in the 1850 chart, you're going to see that the 7 years later, they still identify the daily as paganism and the date of 508. And so we see it here is our second chart. It also put the sanctuary in the bottom left-hand corner. It has that 2520 itsy bitsy tiny numbers in the bottom right-hand corner. You see pagan Rome is identified, papal Rome. And last, we're going to close with this statement. Why are we not using these charts today? Ellen White said in 1902, "The Bible is a chart showing us the waymarks of truth. Those who are acquainted with this chart will be able to tread with certainty in the path of duty wherever they may be called to go." The end.